These Violent Delights, Chapter 11. Juliet slammed the trunk of the car shut, clicking its latch so vigorously that the vehicle shuddered up and down on its tires. "Ready," she called the driver. "Go forth." Through the rearview mirror, the driver gave a grim nod. The car started to pull away from the gravel driveway, rumbling in the direction of the front gate and toward the nearest hospital. The dead bodies in the trunk would be out of Juliet's hands then. She hoped the hospital appreciated how delicately the Scarlets had wrapped the corpses in thick blood sheets. "Miss Kai?" Juliet turned, finding a messenger coming her way. "Yes?" The messenger gestured back at the house. "Your parents have come downstairs. They ask what is occurring." "Oh, now they come down," Juliet muttered under her breath. Not when they were screaming in the hallways. Not when Juliet was yelling obscenities so the gangsters would hurry up with the spare bedsheets and the maids would fetch water so the servants would attempt to scrub out the stains on the floorboards. They were going to need to hire some heavy-duty cleaners. "I'll go speak to my parents," Juliet sighed. She strolled past the messenger, shoulders heavy with anticipation. Her parents might have been taking a meeting upstairs, but dozens of relatives had witnessed the terrible deaths, and talk in this house spread fast. But when Juliet came back into the living room, she had to do a double take, seeing what seemed to be the entirety of her family. "Are we having a party I wasn't invited to?" Juliet jeered, halting to a stop at the threshold. There were still bloodstains in the kitchen, and her relatives were all gathered here in mass. Did they want to get infected and die? Lord Kai stood, cutting off whichever relative had been speaking within the gathering. "Juliet," he said, inclining his chin up the staircase. There was something in his hands. A few slips of creamy white paper. Expensive paper. "Come." It was as clear a dismissal as any for the part of the rest of the household. While everybody else dispersed, however, Tyler remained on the couch, his hands placed behind his head like he had all the time in the world. He cocked his head at Juliet's death glare, feigning obliviousness. Juliet bit down on her tongue. She scuttled up the stairs after her father. "What are we to do with the bloodstains?" she asked, as they filtered into the office. Her mother was already there, seated on the other side of her father's desk, browsing through reports. "We will have someone come to clean it," Lady Kai replied, looking up and flicking a phantom speck of dust off the sleeve of her kippah. "I am more concerned with why people are tearing their throats out in this house in the first place. It's the madness," Juliet interrupted. "It's here, and it could be a viral contagion. We need to ask the other maids who are in contact with the victims to remain in their rooms for a few days." Her father sat down in his own big chair and crossed his hands over his stomach. Her mother tilted her head quizzically. "And how do you know it's a contagion?" Lord Kai asked, though Juliet froze at the question, blatantly realizing she had relayed a detail from Roma, and her father did not sound suspicious. He had only asked the question plainly, as he did in any other everyday conversation. She told herself to calm down. If her father were suspicious, he was the type to make the facts simple and clear. "Word on the street," Juliet replied. "It may only get worse from here on out." Lady Kai pinched the bridge of her nose. She shook her head, waving off the thought. 3 dead in the household still does not stand up against the thousands being swayed by the political tide. Juliet blinked. "But, Mamma, don't you wish to know why everybody was gathered around in such fascination downstairs?" Lord Kai cut in. He pushed the paper in his hands onto the desk, angling them so that Juliet could get a good look. The conversation had moved on then. The madness was truly only an offshoot of politics in their minds. Fine, Juliet thought. If only she was the only one with the right priorities. Then she had solved the whole damn thing on her own. Juliet picked up the smaller slip of paper, her own name immediately catching her attention. "Miss Kai, I would love to see you there. Paul." "What is this?" Juliet demanded. "An invitation," Lady Kai explained, "to a masquerade party in the French concession next week." Juliet leaned in to read the bigger piece of paper, tutting under her breath. She didn't like the sound of this. Foreigners extending their hands in invitation could only mean demands and expectations. "Is it the French who are summoning us?" she asked. "The function is a joint venture between the different foreign powers," her father replied softly. In a mocking tone, he added, "The French, British, Americans, and everyone else. They wish to come together and celebrate the native powers of Shanghai," reciting the text just as Juliet's eyes scanned over it. Our hospitality is extended to all under the protection of Lord Kai, it read. This party was inviting every member of the Scarlet Gang. Lady Kai scoffed. If the foreigners wanted to celebrate us, they could begin by remembering this is our country, not theirs. Juliet turned to look at her mother, curious. Distaste was fouling the lines in Lady Kai's face, deepening the grooves that she spent each morning covering with a layer of fine powder. However, Lord Kai continued, as if his wife hadn't made a scathing remark, it is the French who wish to meet with us. There's another card lurking here somewhere. After a few seconds of confusing searching, Juliet lifted the bigger sheet of paper and found the third and final card, the same size as the one from Paul. This was for her father, from the Consul General of France in Shanghai. There were only 2 lines of writing. He was requesting a meeting at the party to discuss the situation in Shanghai, whatever that meant. Well, Juliet said, does this mean trouble for us? It may not be trouble, Lord Kai shrugged. We'll have to see. Juliet narrowed her eyes. She didn't like how her parents had drifted into a pregnant pause, one that was waiting for something. Something. I certainly hope we're not going to make me go to this masquerade, Juliet guessed contemptuously. I'm not going to make you go like some tyrant, her father replied, but I would strongly prefer if you attended with me. Bah, Juliet whined. I did enough partying in New York to last 9 lives. The French can say they want to discuss the state of affairs in Shanghai all they like, but we know they're useless. Juliet, her mother scolded. What? Juliet retorted, righteous. No, she is right, Lord Kai said. The French wish to meet only to discuss the Scarlet Militia. They wish to hear how many people I have under my control, and they wish to have my cooperation under the possibility of a communist result. That is all true. Her father leaned forward then, pinpointing his gaze on her, and suddenly Juliet regretted whining, because she felt like a child being told off for protesting in early bedtime. But we still need allies. We need power, we need customers, and we need their support. And I need you to be my little translator when they mutter among themselves in French, thinking I cannot understand them. Juliet made a disgruntled noise at the back of her throat. Very well, she said. She reached for the letter of invitation and shoved it in her pocket, wanting to examine it more on her own time. I'll go. Mais ce n'est pas de bon gré. She strode to the door, dismissing herself. She was so close. One hand was already on the handle, and her body was in mid-stride when her mother called out, Wait. Juliet halted. This Paul, Lady Kai said. Why is he calling for you? Lady Kai had said his name like it was some magic spell used for summoning, as if he held some grand weight in it rather than it be one syllable of lackluster annoyance. He is Walter Dexter's son, Juliet replied apathetic. They're still trying to hire us as middlemen for their drug trade. Lady Kai milled over that for a long moment. Then she said, Is he handsome? Ugh, please. Juliet pushed forward. He is using me, Mama. It is that simple. Please excuse me now. I have work to... What are you doing? That latter part was directed at Tyler, who had been lurking close enough to the door that Juliet had hit his shoulder when it opened. Calm down, Tyler said. I'm on my way to the washroom. They both knew that was a big fat lie, as wide as Tyler's monster smile and as long as his list of crimes. Juliet closed her father's office door after herself with a solid thud. She stared at her cousin, waiting, and he only stared back. His cheek was still bright with its cut, having not fully yet scabbed over. Do you have anything you'd like to say to me, Tyler? Juliet asked. Only one, Tyler replied. His eyes flitted up, knowing her parents could still hear the conversation. I'm very excited to attend the party. Les mamans ont tout cru honte ja serai à perdre ta place. Juliet stiffened. Satisfied with the reaction he had incited, Tyler grinned again and merrily pivoted on his heel, strolling down the hallway and his hands shoved into his pockets and a low whistle sounding from his mouth. When you stop being useful, I'll be here to replace you. Va te faire forte, Juliet muttered. She took the stairs down 2 at a time, glared at the relatives who were still chatting on the couches, when she made a beeline for the kitchen. There she found Kathleen, who was still peering at the stains on the floor tiles. She was also chomping on an apple, though it was beyond Juliet how her cousin managed to have an appetite. "Any luck?" Juliet asked. "Oh, I gave up trying to clean out the stains 10 minutes ago," Kathleen replied. "I'm just expecting that one because it looks like a cat." Juliet blinked. Kathleen took another bite of her apple. "Too soon?" "Way too soon," Juliet said. "Are you busy right now? I need your communist ties." "For the last time," Kathleen threw her apple core into the trash can. "Knowing who our spies are on the party does not qualify me as a communist. What am I finding?" Juliet put her hands on her hips. "Zhang Gutai's home address." Kathleen wrinkled her brow, trying to place the name. "You can't find his workplace? He edits that newspaper, doesn't he?" I can go poke around his workplace, too," Juliet confirmed. "But I want alternatives." Alternatives was a funny way of putting it. Juliet wanted his home address so she could break in and rummage along his belongings, should his answers in person prove lacking. But she didn't have to clarify for Kathleen. Kathleen knew. She mocked a salute, her lips quirking. On it. "Lice?" Roma echoed in horror. "Lice-like," Lorenz emphasized, his correction accompanied by a sigh. He pointed to the strip of skin he had slid off the corpse, where the thick membranes were bulging with little pockets of dead insects. Benedict was slightly green, and Marshall had his fingers pressed to his mouth. "They jump from host to host through the hair, then burrow into the scalp," Lorenz went on. He pushed on an insect with his finger. Nearby, one of the scientists was blanching at the sight, unable to pull his curiosity away from the unconventional autopsy happening right atop the work table. No matter. The white flowers had seen stranger things. "Good God," Marshall muttered. "We could have been infected." Benedict made an offended noise. "They're dead already," he replied, gesturing forward with his hand. "And yet you make me pull one out," Marshall retorted. He shuddered, his full body vibrating with emotion. "So revolting." Roma tapped his fingers against the work table. The lab was devoid of proper fresh air, and he had hardly slept the night before. His head was starting to pound with ferocity. "Gentlemen," he prompted, trying to redirect Benedict's and Marshall's attention back to Lorenz. It did not work. "The future well-being of the White Flowers thanks you." "Oh, please, what will they know of my heroism?" Roma exchanged a glance with Lorenz and shook his head. There was no point in trying to butt in when Benedict and Marshall got like this. When they weren't scheming together, they were bickering together. It was almost always about the most nonsensical things, and truly did not require an hour-long debate, yet, regardless, Roma's two friends engaged in them, sometimes until their faces turned red. Roma wasn't sure if Benedict and Marshall were fated to eventually kill each other or kiss each other. "Anyhow," Lorenz said, clearing his throat when the slightest lull of the argument. "With the resources we have here, we may be more advanced than Shanghai's hospitals. I'd like to try to figure out how to engineer a cure if that pleases you." "Yes," Roma all but pleaded. "That would be great. Thank you, Lorenz." "Do not rush to thank me yet," Lorenz tutted. "I could not find a cure for this odd infestation without the help of you youth." Marshall quirked an eyebrow. Benedict jammed his elbow into Marshall's ribs to keep him from making any sarcastic remark about his youth. "Anything," Roma promised. "I'll need to run experiments," Lorenz said. He nodded to himself. "You must find me a live victim." "Alive?" This time it was Roma who jammed the elbow into Marshall's side. "We're on it," Roma said quickly. "Thank you, Lorenz, truly." When Lorenz nodded his begrudging acceptance of such a sentiment, Roma pushed away from the work table, gesturing for Benedict and Marshall to follow suit, and the three of them took their leave. Roma was rather impressed that Marshall managed to stay silent until they pushed through the front doors. It was only when they were upon the sidewalk, under the thick clouds of the city, that Marshall finally erupted with, "How the hell do you suppose we bring him a live victim?" Roma sighed, shoving his hands deep in his pockets. He started back in the direction of the White Flowers' headquarters with his cousin trailing close in tail. Marshall, meanwhile, was a bundle of unspent energy, bouncing in front of them, walking backward. "You're going to trip on a pebble," Benedict warned. "You're giving me a headache," Roma added. "We don't know who's victim of the madness until they succumb to it," Marshall went on, ignoring them both. "As soon as someone is succumbing, how would we keep them alive long enough to take them to the lab?" Roma shut his eyes momentarily. Then he opened them again. They felt like they weighed 1,000 tons. I don't know. The throbbing in his head was only getting worse. Roma hardly contributed to conversation as they made their way home, and when he turned to the main building block appeared, he ducked through with a muttered goodbye, leaving Benedict and Marshall to stare after him before they proceeded to their own living quarters. His friends would forgive him. Roma fell silent when he needed to think, when the city grew far too loud and he could hardly hear his own thoughts. Roma eased in front of the door shut. All he needed was the moment of quiet, and then he could have a grand old time trying to figure out a plan for Lawrence. Roma! Roma's head jerked up, his foot stalling on the first step of the staircase. At the landing of the second floor, his father was staring at him. Yes? Without any prelude, Lord Montagov simply extended his arm, a piece of paper held between his fingers. Roma thought that his father would meet him halfway as he made his way up the stairs, but Lord Montagov remained where he was, forcing Roma to trek forward in a hurry as to not keep his father waiting, almost panting by the time he was close enough to take a slip of the paper. It bore a name and an address, written in loopy scrawl. Find him, Lord Montagov sneered, when Roma looked up for explanation. My sources say that the communists may be cause of this insipid madness. Roma's fingers tightened on the slip of paper. What? He demanded. The communists have been seeking our help for years, and given that we keep refusing them, his father cut in, they are switching tactics. They make their revolution by squashing our power before we can counter their efforts. Stop them. Could it be a motive as simple as politics? Kill the gangsters so that there was no opposition? Infect the workers so they were angry and desperate enough to buy into any revolutionary scheming in their ear? Easy as a river breeze. How am I to stop a whole political faction? Roma muttered, merely deliberating aloud. How am I to... A hard knock came on his skull. Roma flinched, moving away from his father's knuckles to avoid a second blow. He should have known better than to muse within his father's earshot. I gave you an address, didn't I? Lord Montagov snapped. Go. See how much truth there is to this claim. With that, his father turned and disappeared back into his office. Roma was left behind on the stairs, holding the slip of paper, his head throbbing worse than before. Very well, he muttered bitterly. Kathleen tread along the waterfront, her steps slow against the hard granite. This far east it was almost quiet, the usual screaming by the Bund replaced by a clanging shipbuilding warehouses and lumber companies rumbling to finish their day's work. Almost quiet, but hardly peaceful. There was no place in Shanghai that could qualify as peaceful. Better hurry, she muttered to herself, checking the pocket watch in her sleeve. The sun would soon be setting, and it got cold by the Huangpu River. Kathleen paced the rest of the way to the cotton mill, taking not the front entrance but a back window, right into the workers' break room. These laborers weren't offered many breaks, but as the end of their shifts crept nearer, some of them could come around to take a breather, and when Kathleen delicately climbed through the window, swinging her legs in, there was indeed a woman sitting there, eating rice out of a container. The woman almost spat her rice out through her nose. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, Kathleen said quickly. Would you be able to fetch Daniel for me? Important scarlet business. Boss won't mind. Scarlet business? The woman echoed, putting her container down. She wore a red bracelet, so she was associated with the Scarlets, yet her voice sounded skeptical all the same. When the woman stood, she paused, taking a moment to squint at Kathleen. Instinctively, Kathleen reached up to touch her hair, to make sure the wisps of her bangs lay right above the arched brows she had delicately filled in. She was always careful not to touch her face too much. She spent far too long every morning doing her cosmetics until her face was soft and her chin was pointed to mess it up in the middle of the day. A long moment passed. Finally, the woman nodded and said, 1 second. Kathleen heaved an exhale as soon as she left the room. She hadn't realized how tense she had grown, how she had almost expected the woman to speak her mind, to ask what right Kathleen had to be here, digging her nose into scarlet business. But at the end of the day, Kathleen was the one wearing the silk kipao, and this woman was the one in a cotton uniform that likely hadn't been replaced in years. She wouldn't have dared. The only one who did dare question her right to exist was her own father. Don't think about it, Kathleen muttered to herself. Stop thinking about it. She was already thinking about it. about the first argument they had when her father arrived in Paris, summoned because one of his 3 children had fallen ill. "It's influenza," the doctor had said. "She might not recover." Her father's temper was already at its breaking point. His French too elementary to understand the doctors, and when Kathleen tried to help, pulled him out of the hallway after the doctors left to make sure her father understood their options. "I can't even listen to you right now," he sneered. He looked her up and down, eyeing her dress, the inspection dripping with distaste. "Not until you stop wearing such—" "Don't," Kathleen cut in. Her father reared back. Perhaps it had been the interruption that was more offensive. Perhaps it had been her tone, certain in her command without wavering. "What have the tutors been teaching you?" he snapped. "You do not talk back to me." "Or what, Baba?" she said evenly. "What will you do?" For thousands of years, the worst crime in China was a lack of filial piety. Having children with no Shaoshan was fate worse than death. It meant being forgotten in the afterlife, a wandering ghost doomed to starve when no offerings came in from irreverent descendants. But it was her father who had sent them out here, who had thinned the string that China tied around her wrists. He had sent them to the West, where they were taught different ideas, taught about a different afterlife that had nothing to do with burning paper money. The West had corrupted them, and whose fault was that? Her father had nothing more to say. "Go," he snapped. "Go back into the room and join your sisters. I will speak to the doctors." Kathleen did not protest. She had wondered at that moment, peering over the shoulder as her father stood there, if he had ever cursed the universe for taking his wife in childbirth. If he regretted losing her in exchange for 3 strangers. For Kathleen, Rosalind, and Celia. A girl who had been sickly all her life. A girl who was in training to be Shanghai's dazzling star. And a girl who just wanted to be left alone to live as she was. Kathleen closed her eyes tightly, her teeth gritted hard, forcing the memories back. Her father would have forced her into hiding if he'd had his way. He would have rather disowned her than let her back in Shanghai wearing a kipao, and Kathleen would never packed her bags and made her way across Europe than go being her father's prodigal son. She supposed it was fortunate that Kathleen Lane, the real Kathleen, died of influenza 2 weeks after falling sick for 14 years of life, coming to a close with no real friends, having been distant from her 2 sisters all her life. How were you supposed to mourn someone you never really knew? It was empty expressions under black veils and cold stares at the cremation vase. Even the thickest blood from the wound can run thin if given the empty space to bleed. "I won't call you Celia," her father said at the port, lifting her suitcases. "That's not the name I gave you at birth." He cast her a glance askew. "But I will call you Kathleen, and say for Rosalind, you may tell no one. It is for your own safety. You must realize that." She did. She had fought so hard all her life just to be called Celia, and now her father wanted to give her a different name, and she could accept it. The Lang triplets had been away from Shanghai for so long that not a soul had questioned Kathleen's changed face when the family returned. Except Juliet. Juliet noticed everything. But their cousin had been quick to nod along, making the switch from Celia to Kathleen as quickly as she had made the switch to Celia. Now Kathleen responded to this name as if it were her own, as if it were the only name she had ever known, and it was a comfort, no matter how strange. "Hello." Kathleen jumped at Da Niao's sudden appearance in the break room, her hand flying to her heart. "Are you quite all right?" Da Niao asked. "Perfectly," Kathleen breathed. She squared her shoulders, recovering back into a business mode. "I need a favor. I'm after Zhang Gutai's personal address." Though her cousin didn't know it, Juliet was actually familiar with Da Niao, whose name translated literally to big brain. He spent some hours working at this cotton mill and some as a fisherman along the Bund, retrieving fresh stock for the Scarlet Gang. He had been around during their childhood and had dropped by the Scarlet residence at least 3 times since Juliet's return. The Scarlet Gang liked their fresh fish, but they didn't need to know that their primary supplier was also their eyes and ears within the party. "Zhang Gutai," Da Niao echoed. "You want the Secretary General's personal address." "Indeed." Da Niao was pulling a face that said, "What the hell do you need that for?" But he didn't ask, and Kathleen didn't tell. So the fisherman tapped his chin in thought and said, "I can find it for you. But our next meeting is not until Saturday. It may have to wait until then. Kathleen nodded. That is fine. Thank you. Dao Niao left the break room without any fanfare. Mission achieved. Kathleen started to climb through the window again, only this time, as she slid into the ledge, her hand came upon a flyer lying there, face down and grimly with dirt and grease. Kathleen flicked it over. The rule of the gangsters is over. It is time to unionize. Her eyebrows shot straight up. She wondered if this was Dao Niao's doing, but she couldn't imagine so. Yet at the bottom of the flyer, typed in a neat faded line, it read, "Distributed on behalf of the Communist Party of China." It would seem Dao Niao was not the only employee here with communist ties. A strange splashing noise by the wharf startled Kathleen out of her reverie, prompting her to hop off the ledge and back into the ground outside the cotton mill. When Kathleen looked out into the water, she thought she caught a flash of something shiny darting through the waves. Strange, she muttered. She hurried home.